I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender. Everybody knows I've had points where I've lost everything. I've had to switch entire careers, and doing that is a lonely and scary feeling, no matter which way you're trying to reinvent yourself. So Reinvent Yourself, the book, I wrote this book just for people like me who really wanted to learn how to switch careers, not just once or twice, but I've had to do it probably 10 times. Reinvent Yourself is all about taking action, no matter where you are starting from. And in this book, I disclose how I tell dozens of stories of other people, how we've turned our lives around, and how I know you can too, no matter where you're starting from, because I've started from the bottom. Whether you want to supplement your income with a little extra cash or replace your job, or even if you're looking for a way to fund your retirement, or just simply your interests have changed and now you have to start from scratch in a new area of life, the book Reinvent Yourself will show you how. I've reserved a copy for anyone listening to this today that I'd like to ship to you for absolutely free. All you have to do is go to www.reinventbook.net. That's www.reinventbook.net. The tools are there. The opportunities are there. The gatekeepers are disappearing. It's possible to create the life you want. And I've talked to so many people about this, plus my own experience. So go to www.reinventbook.net right now. I'm excited about what this book can do for you. That's www.reinventbook.net. And I really appreciate any feedback as well on this.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Choose Yourself Network. Today on the James Altucher Show.
I was arrested as a child when I was 15 years old. The cops beat us so bad. They just kicked my brother and I. They kicked us in the groin over and over again. We were urinating blood for 7 days. And that was just one of the many ways that just fortified us to understand that you can't sit back and talk about woe is me. You have to say, why not me? Why can't I be the person to change things are? And that's my narrative. My narrative has always been that.
So some of these issues you brought up, and there are there's always issues where a city can improve, and you've identified them so much in many of your speeches, but just going to reel back a tiny second. I think it was 2006, you became a state senator. You finally decided, okay, I'm going to make the move. I'm just going to flat ask, was that boring for you? After you were a policeman, you were like, fighting criminals like a superhero on the subway. You were making changes that were actually happening in the police force, and now you got to go up to Albany, and it seems like that just seems like a mess. No business owner wakes up and says, boy, I can't wait to figure out what my sales taxes are today. It is time consuming, and I don't even know all the laws and regulations and so on. But thankfully, there's a company that does. Company is Avalara. They simplify sales tax with real-time tax rate calculations, automatic return filing. They seamlessly integrate with your accounting, e-commerce, point-of-sale system, so it is totally easy. You do not even have to think about this anymore. And they have experts in 15 countries around the world to help as you grow. Learn more at avalara.com/James. Avalara, tax compliance done right. So before I introduce this next guest, who's become a good friend, and he's a excellent human being, and you'll see why, I want to ask a question to the listeners. If you were to take every borough of New York City, so Manhattan, Queens, Bronx, Brooklyn, Staten Island, and assume that they were not boroughs of a bigger city, but assume that they were their own cities, what would be the most populated cities in the United States? So think about it for just a few seconds, and I'll tell you, LA is still the most populated city in the United States. Chicago is the second most populated city in the United States, assuming, again, all the boroughs are their own cities. And then Brooklyn would be the third most populated city in the United States. So please welcome Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. How's it going, Eric?
Good to see you. Good to see you. I used to have hair that long.
Yeah, what happened?
You're ageless, so you don't have to worry about it. You have this like white guy afro thing going on.
No, people always say African Americans are ageless. Now we're being totally racist. We're starting off the podcast immediately racist. You only have a $69 billion GDP in Brooklyn, but we could talk about anything. And So yeah, and I can add, not only are you running for mayor for the next mayoral race, which is in 2021, but you're, I don't know how you judge the front runner, but you're certainly in the lead in terms of fundraising, right?
Yes,
so,
yes.
And I'm surprised, though, that we'll talk about everything in your background in a second, but I'm just curious, like, do people fundraise this much in advance? Is it important for...
Yes. Really, the campaign for fiscal equity, they have a system that's in place. We have a matching fund system, 8-to-1 or 6-to-1. And you could only start fundraising in the year of the 4-year span of the election cycle. The mayor's race is every 4 years. And so 2018, we started fundraising. And really, you have to start gearing up and meeting people long before that. It's a very serious undertaking to run for mayor.
Well, it's interesting also, if you just look at the numbers, when you won for Brooklyn Borough President, you got almost 91% of the vote. That's like incredible. That's like dictatorship type votes. And if you just take those votes and nobody else votes for you, you'd still win for mayor, like with those kind of numbers, basically.
Brooklyn is an interesting borough because, as you stated, it's the third largest city in America if it was a separate city. And at one time, it was a city unto its own until it incorporated with New York City, as well as Rockaway. Many people don't know that, but both Brooklyn and Rockaway became part of New York City at the same time.
I didn't know Rockaway was separate from
It
Brooklyn.
was separate also. It used to be separate from Queens. They came together as well. But what's fascinating is if you look at the races that are happening, the Attorney General, Letitia James, came from Brooklyn. Jumaane Williams, the public advocate, came from Brooklyn. Bill de Blasio came from Brooklyn. The volume of votes in Brooklyn is so large that it really determines many of the races in this city and now even in the state.
I feel also Brooklyn's an interesting... I mean, it's almost a cliche to use the word melting pot, but I was reading 200 different languages are spoken in Brooklyn. Like, Brooklyn is so culturally diverse. And then you have, on top of that, sort of the gentrification of the past 15 years, 20 years that's occurred, which we'll talk a little bit about because I think that's transformed the landscape of Brooklyn somewhat and even of Manhattan because of that. So it's a very interesting city, borough.
Very, very diverse. 47% of Brooklynites speak a language other than English at home, according to the last census. Those numbers are far more than that because only 50% of the Brooklyn residents actually responded to the census. So our numbers are higher than even the 2.6 million people that call Brooklyn home. But the evolution of the borough and the stories of the borough and the connectivity of people who came from Brooklyn and their love affair of Brooklyn. I mean, people walk around no matter where you are on the globe, and when they hear that you're from Brooklyn, their ears perks up and they say, wow, my heart is in the borough of Brooklyn. There's something about, I don't know if it's the Brooklyn Dodgers or there's something that people romanticize about their days in Brooklyn and how it is. And so we're getting a whole new crop of young people who are experiencing Brooklyn and bringing their flavor and their energy to the borough. And it's growing, it's exciting, and it's intimidating for longtime residents. But, we welcome that, and it's about change, but you change in a welcoming way.
Well, I think whenever people think of, let's say, the classic 1940s, 50s, 60s New Yorker, and they start kind of emulating the accent, what they're really emulating is a Brooklyn
That's
accent.
right, a Brooklyn.
The classic New Yorker is a Brooklynite, actually.
Right.
So, but let's reel it back. You were obviously born and raised in Brooklyn. Where are you from?
Combination. I grew up in between Brooklyn and Queens. I lived in Brooklyn until I was 7 years old. My mother, who's an amazing woman, she purchased a home in St. Albans, Queens. She's still there in the house, and the narrative around her home really says a lot. She really was a cleaning woman. She used to clean and iron clothing for people. My job, we used to have this old iron. You put it on the stove. My job, I was a tester to make sure the iron was hot enough not to scorch the shirts that she was ironing. And Mommy bought a home. And it was really amazing. I remember two parts of that narrative when we were in the walk-up tenement, and Mom said that I'm going to move my children out of Brooklyn, Brownsville, 1218 Gates Avenue. We used to live down the block from Broadway. I thought it was the Broadway where Sammy Davis Jr. played. Wrong, And so Mom finally saved up enough back then. She bought a home, and when she went to the closing, James, the attorney that she cleaned his house was the attorney for the bank.
Wow.
And he says, "What are you doing here, Dorothy?" And she says, "This is my house." And after they did the closing, she went to his house, she cleaned up, and he fired her.
Why?
He says, "How dare you think you're going to buy a house?" And she says, "Eric, I went in the subway station and I just cried and I yelled out and I dried my eyes and I got on the train. I said, I have a house with 6 children. I have to make sure I have to do what I have to do to keep it."
Wow. So that's like, usually, okay, so he blatantly knew he was causing this person who has, done well for him over the years. He blatantly knew he was causing incredible hardship for her. And yet he just didn't want her moving into town.
Not even moving into town. It was, I cannot explain what was his mindset, but it was just the depth of, who do you think you are? And that is the hidden part of isms that our families went through: anti-Semitism, racism, anti-Chineseism. Those isms aren't always in your face, and they don't really tell the narrative. How many times did people from Jewish descent was not allowed in certain colleges, were denied? People think that it was always they were allowed into Harvard or Yale, but the reality was that there was more than one way to close the door on just fairness. And Mom just experienced that, was just one of the many ways that it just fortified us to understand that you can't sit back and talk about woe is me. You have to say, why not me? Why can't I be the person to change things are? And that's my narrative. My narrative has always been that I was arrested as a child when I was 15 years old. The cops beat us so bad, they just kicked my brother and I, they kicked us in the groin over and over again. We were urinating blood for 7 days.
So what was happening? Like, so tell me about that.
I was just
incident.
a bad kid. So when I see bad kids nowadays, I understand them.
Like, what were you doing?
I was just reckless and foolish and stupid. One of my perfect examples of the Eric Adams. There was a incident that happened on a bar that's called Dead Man Road, where someone let off a shot inside the bar one day. So my friends and I, we went down to the bar the next day with a pack of firecrackers, and we threw it in the bar and started running, because we thought it was funny. This is what children do, And so we always have to remember that. We get adult amnesia, and we forget how dumb we were when we were growing up. So when I see young people doing things, I say, listen, let's not act like we were the perfect children when we were growing up. We were reckless, we were dumb, and that's what being a child is about.
Well, it's even goes down to how the brain forms. Like the part of the brain that that helps you make rational decisions, that part doesn't finish growing until you're about 25, 30.
Exactly.
And so
exactly.
at 15, I think probably the evolutionary reason for it is you're probably encouraged to take risks and not think about it, so you know what you can survive and not survive and so on. So there's
true.
Kids are definitely,
and they're supposed to. Some great philosophers stated the biggest problem of adults is that they grow up. We grow up, we become jaded, we change our outlook, we change how we think, we stop dreaming. So you don't lose your dreams because you get older. You get older because you abandon your dreams. And young people still have that energy. And that's why it's important to surround ourselves with young people with that energy so that we can continue to learn and grow.
Yeah, and I'm gonna ask you about that in a second, but it reminds me of one anecdote, which is I heard this statistic that the average kid laughs 300 times a day, and the average adult laughs 5 times a day.
It's so true. And Dr. Dispenza, he talks about this in his book, Changing the Habits of Being You. I think it's in his book, You Are the Placebo. But if you really think about it, it was such a wake-up call for me. Our life is divided into being disappointed about the things that happen, afraid of the things that are going to happen, and we're never living in the present. We are torn between these two places, and we never really get in the moment. That's why I meditate every day and every night. It's about take the present, enjoy the present, start your day of embracing what it has to offer, and the power of people just being present and being conscious in the moment. We're upset of what happened in our lives in the past. We're afraid of what is to come, that there's not a moment of when are you here if you're always there.
And the interesting thing about meditation is that and I think a lot of misconception is, during that 15 minutes, half hour that you're meditating, there's something magical that happens. But it's more like what you're saying. It's really just practice so that later on in the day, when you do have the raging battles of every single day, you're able to remember that practice and put yourself in the present so you could function better.
It's so true. And, I used to hear about PTSD, officers experiencing PTSD, and I was like, what is this they're talking about? Until after my health journey, and it took me not only healing myself physically, but also how do I start the process of going into the black hole of researching how do you heal yourself emotionally. And I realized that when I left policing, I was experiencing vicarious trauma. Every day, all day, I'm experiencing people that are in pain. You start to live through that. And so, in fact, I was experiencing PTSD. And meditation was a way to really heal that PTSD and allow me to just really go inside and do self-healing. We don't do that.
Well, I wanna get to that, but I wanna when the police beat you when you were 15, and I assume there was no recourse, you couldn't complain about them, even though you and your brother were severely hurt. Everything's about choices. So you made a choice. You're going to go into the police, which is sort of these guys beat the hell out of me. Now I'm going to join them now.
Right.
Like, I'm just curious, first off, what choice did your brother make?
That's a great question. And no one asked that question. I believe today some of the trauma my brother is experiencing now is because he never healed from that. He's dealing with some serious issues around that. I think he has undiagnosed bipolar. I think that that was a sad moment for him, and he never recovered. And it's amazing how two human beings can experience the same encounter and walk away with something different. I knew I was in pain, and I wanted to turn my pain into purpose. And
did you consciously think that though? Then
it was an opportunity. I was a computer programmer. That was my skill, and that is part of my journey, my evolution of how I dealt with the crime fighting tactics. But at that time, there was a shooting in our community by a young man named Randolph Evans, a housing police officer. When the police agencies were split into three, a housing police officer, for no reason, Randolph Evans walked up to the car and said, "Are you coming from my family's house?" The cop took out his gun and shot him. Went to trial, and the officer was found not guilty. And this caused a great uproar in the African-American community in Brooklyn, and the leaders of the community approached 13 of us and told us they wanted us to go into the police department and change from within. And I was not trying to hear it at first. And they said, no, this is something you have to do. And I went into the transit police, later became the New York City Police Department. But when I got there, I had a mission, and I saw that this was a way for me to deal with the demasculation I felt. Imagine being a young man and, kicked in the groin. You feel demasculated. And I was holding in all that anger. And when I got into the police department and I was able to go after those who are identified among the great men and women who police our city, but those numbers who are abusive, I was able to do something about it. And so that pain turned into purpose, and I was just a mission-driven individual. People say, listen, guy, you out of your mind. You're attacking your employer. But I wasn't out of my mind. I was finding my mind.
Right, because you're trying to, again, the change from within makes a better machine overall.
Yes.
You wanted this to be an effective police force for New York City. But so you get into the police force. This was 1984, right?
Yes.
You get into the police force, and I would think my first instinct, whether I wanted to or not, would be find the officers who beat me up and punish them. And did you try to seek them out, or were you looking for kind of what was fractured in the system to begin with? I'm not saying the system was bad or good. I'm just saying there was, like with any police system or any institution, it's always evolving. Were you trying to find what was fractured that you were familiar with and try to improve it, or were you trying to find individuals?
It was so fascinating. I did not. The last thing on my mind was saying, let me go find these two officers. It was a different city. It was during a time where there was a lot of abusive behavior from the small number of bad cops. And I always want to emphasize that, because sometimes our negative experiences, we make them believe that this is universal, and it's not. The number of men and women who patrol our streets are real heroes and sheroes. But there was a serious number, and the police agencies in New York and across America, they became safe havens for those who were abusive because we were doing nothing to get rid of them. So I was on a mission of identifying those who were really taking down the profession and saying to our cities that we need to move these officers out of this noble profession. But at the same time, we were an unsafe city. We were having 2,000 homicides a year in this city, 98,000 robberies, and almost an equal amount of felonious assaults. People were living like cage animals in their homes. And I had this skill of computer programming, and I was able to link up with a man named Jack Maple. He has now transitioned, and Bill Bratton. And we started this whole system of real-time crime fighting that subsequently led to this being one of the safest big cities in America. And I was able to balance of protecting citizens, but at the same time making this police department a better place.
Yeah, because I remember New York City in the 80s. I mean, now people even jokingly say it's like Disneyland, but Brooklyn was horrible, right? In terms of violent crime, like there was a lot of areas you would be scared to walk in. But even Manhattan, like
yes,
block by block, you had to even like 14th Street, which is now it's a garden there. That was like the worst. And of course, 42nd Street was the worst, and Hell's Kitchen was the worst. There was the 30s were the worst. Avenue A was the worst. There was no safe area really.
Right.
In the 70s was obvious because New York was bankrupt, but even in the 80s, it wasn't until I would say mid to late 90s that Manhattan was starting to become this Disneyland, and then that kind of went over into Brooklyn as well.
Right, and literally and figuratively, because 42nd Street, which was a bastion of porn shops and other people went there for bad reasons. You go there now and you see Disney everywhere. You see families are enjoying. But many people grew up not knowing about this city like that. And they felt as though this was always New York. Williamsburg was always Williamsburg. Greenpoint was always Greenpoint. You can always walk through Central Park late at night. That was not the reality. I mean, we used to have these things called clubs. That wasn't a prestigious group. That was a device you put over your steering wheel to stop people from stealing your car. We built industries around the fact we surrendered to the belief we could not be safe. And I talk about that all the time when I'm campaigning because people need to understand that I don't want my son growing up in the city that I grew up in. We were divided. We were living in fear. Crime controlled us, and we surrendered. We no longer believed. And I want us to continue on this pathway of belief, and we have to do it in a very smart way.
So what you describe when you get into the police force, obviously the first job is to be a policeman. So you, like you said, you worked on developing this real-time system with Bill Bratton to track crime. Were you also did you have a beat? Did you walk around and catch criminals?
Yeah, I started out in the transit police department. I wrote the trains from 8 at night to 4 in the morning alone. Transit police officers did not have partners. You were on a train by yourself.
Which, by the way, again, was as scary as New York was above ground. It was scarier underground. I was scared.
The transit system was fear on steroids.
Yeah,
it was very intimidating. I used to ride from Coney Island all the way through to Manhattan, 34th Street, and from 8 at night to 4 in the morning. You don't have the police out during those hours. It was very frightening, and you just had to be smart. You had to know how to engage people. Radio didn't operate. How you got assistance is you would throw your nightstick on the platform. It makes a unique sound when it hits the concrete, and you will hope that one of the officers will hear it, and that was your call for service or assistance.
So what was like the most dangerous thing that happened during those times?
Oh, man, there's so many to choose for, from... it was one time I was on the Coney Island on Easter Day was one of the most dangerous days you could patrol the subway system. And there was a riot on the train while I'm pulling out of going across the Brooklyn Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge. The Manhattan Bridge had the train that went over, and there was a riot on the train. So even if I could get help, it wasn't coming until I got on the other side of the Manhattan.
What does it even mean, a riot on the train?
People were just fighting. They were coming from a party. It was late at night. It was about 2:30 in the morning, and they were coming from Coney Island, and a lot of drinks and a lot of alcohol and a lot of testosterone is flowing, and they were just on the train fighting all over the place. Someone pulls the emergency cord, so the train is stuck on the bridge between stations, and it just so happens smart thinking transit cops realized that they heard the signal because I came out of the out of the tunnel, so they heard me call over the air, and they had to come through the stations on both sides to get to us, and it was intimidating. There was a lot of hairy times and moments when you're by yourself on that system. Again, you have to be smart. You have to really plan your execution to make sure that help is on the way and that you're not doing something in between those stations when you lose your radio signal.
I mean, were you scared every night?
Just about, just about, because you knew, particularly Thursday, Fridays, and Saturday and Sunday, you knew it was going to be something was going to happen on the train during those times. Because remember, it wasn't during the day. It was 8 at night to 4 in the morning during the 80s. That says a lot,
And then on top of this, you took it upon yourself to basically add to your job description by saying, look, the police force and not only do I need to do my job and protect the city, but the police force as a whole needs to evolve and, get out corruption, get out abuses of the system, and so on. How did you kind of elevate your status to be able to do that? Did you do that kind of on your own? Did you were you promoted to that, or what was happening?
I was still I was a rookie cop. I had no idea I was going to last for 22 years. I thought I would be there a year and they'd say, listen, get rid of this guy. This guy's a troublemaker. I was a probationary officer where you could be fired at any time for cause. But I was driven. And the plan was not to stay there long. The plan was to go in there with the mission. The mission was find ways to make communities safe without being in disgrace. How do you turn this noble profession into what it ought to be? And I was with a member, each fraternal group organization, every ethnic group has a fraternal organization. The Italians have the Colombian societies. The Hispanic officers, they would have the Hispanic society. So they were all societies. For the African-American officers, it was the Guardian Society. And I became the chairman of the Grand Council of all the Guardian organizations.
As a rookie?
My second year in the police department. And I became the chairman, and it was a coalition of all of the African-American law enforcement agencies in the city, Department of Corrections, courts.
How'd you become chairman of this? I mean, what I'm hinting at is what qualities in you said, okay, I've been doing this 2 years. There's people here who have been doing it for maybe 20, 30. I'm going to lead them.
Just driven. Some came into the department as a career to make sure they were able to pay their mortgage. Some came in because it was a way of getting a steady paycheck. Some came in with the desire of making people safe. People come in for different reasons. I came in with a driven purpose. I had an assignment. I was living up to it, and I knew I could not do it if I just maintain a patrol mindset. And it was probably just driven to the passion of making our city safe and, again, not having people be in disgrace.
And how did you build, as you were rising up, like as you became the chairman of this, how did you build kind of consensus among the other members that, okay, I'm the right choice to do this for you? Like you say, some of the people didn't want maybe the extra work. They wanted to they had their families, they're paying the mortgage, you were young. So I get that part, but other people maybe were probably a little distrustful or like, oh, what is this kid's gonna break a system that we're already paying our mortgage with? We don't want to do too much other damage.
That's a great question because people who are oppressed are really concerned if someone comes in and do away with even what they have. So we had a body of people who was saying, you're going to make it difficult for us. But there was also a substantial number of people who started to say, wait a minute, I'm getting these calls that my son is being arrested. My cousin is being arrested. They started to see that although we were part of the police department, the manner in which we were policing in the city was impacting our family members as well. It was impacting our family members because they were becoming victims of crimes, but it also was impacting our family members because they were being a victim of over-aggressive policing. And so coming in with that mission, and I've learned that people can see if you authentically care. There's one thing if you're trying to do it for some reason, but people started to see my passion and my concern, and they started to support me and become part of this movement of making our city a safe place where people can raise healthy children and families.
Did you have a sense already of solutions towards, building consensus and coalitions beyond the Guardians to the other kind of demographics of the police force?
Yes, which when you talk to many people in policing, although I was extremely critical, all of the major unions would tell you that Eric was a person that you could sit down and communicate with, and he wanted to be solution-oriented and focus on that. As I moved up through the ranks to a sergeant, a lieutenant, and a captain, all of my officers would tell you that, he was an amazing boss. He was an amazing supervisor that really understood the concept that I even shared today, families first. You put your family in front of whatever you do. And people saw that I knew that people matter, and they saw how much I knew that they matter. I was always concerned about the individual. If you make a whole individual, you are going to have a whole agency. And that is how we should move forward.
Let's stop to take a quick break. We'll be right back. As a small business owner, you already have a lot, even too much on your plate. The last thing you need to worry about is your bank. That's why Axos Bank provides simple, convenient, and hassle-free banking that business owners like you deserve. Axos, AXOS, is so confident in their basic business checking account that they'll give you $50 to try it out. Just use promo code JAMES and visit Axos, AXOS, axosbank.com/James today to get started. Axos is 100% digital with much lower overhead costs than traditional banks, so they pass those savings on to their customers. That's why they're able to do this. This means no maintenance fees, no minimum balance requirements, unlimited domestic ATM fee reimbursements, your first 50 checks for free, and up to 200 free transactions per month on their basic business checking account. Axos lets you access your money anytime, anywhere. Their time-saving digital tools allow you to check your accounts, make deposits, and pay bills wherever you are. Stay ahead of the challenges of modern business with a bank that works for you. Visit axosbank.com/James to learn more and get your $50. Axos Bank, small business banking simplified. You know, I've always wondered about this, but now I know the answer. What actually makes a better toothbrush? Is it industrial strength power, multiple modes? Look, I've even asked the dentist and they'll tell you it's less about the brush and more about how you use it. That's why you need Quip, Q-U-I-P. Quip's sensitive vibrations with a built-in timer guide gentle brushing for the dentist recommended 2 minutes. The 30-second pulses ensure an even clean. And Quip automatically delivers brush heads to you every 3 months for clean new bristles right on schedule. The sleek, intuitive design is simple to use and comes with a travel cap that doubles as a mirror mount as well. Simply put, Quip makes brushing something you actually want to do twice a day, and good habits really do matter to live a healthier life. For me, I probably wouldn't brush 2 times a day if I didn't use something like Quip. It's an excellent toothbrush. I've never seen anything like it. And I highly recommend at least trying it out. And they start at just $25. You'll get your first refill free at getquip.com/James. Getquip.com/James. This is a simple way to support our show and start brushing better. But you have to go to GetQuip, Q-U-I-P, getquip.com/James to get your first refill for free. You could have just kept your head down, been a patrolman, did your job, but you kind of doubled your workload, but it kind of built you this network throughout the city and you started to have impact. And I get the sense that early on, you probably felt like you could take this even further. And, like for instance, in 1994, you ran for Congress, right? So obviously, you were young then. It didn't work out. I don't know how much you want to. Maybe you have more PTSD about that election than the police. But what happened there?
No, it was a campaign. I ran against Major Owens. I was really just experiencing what it was. I wanted a platform to talk about these issues. I was noticing that what was happening on the street, when you start to arrest young people at that time, 14, 15 years old, and they couldn't spell their names. They couldn't fill out a form. They couldn't answer some of the important issues. They couldn't spell the name of their street. You start to say, something is wrong here. And there was this common denominator of those we were coming in contact with that was having some real issues around education, which I later learned that that's the feeder of all the dysfunctionality we see in our city and country. It goes back to those early days of a child. We are producing broken children that are turning into broken adults that feeds the systems of dysfunctionality that we should have dealt with early on in the lives of parents and children. And I started to see that pattern and realized that many people who were in government was no longer speaking in a realistic way to what was happening on the ground. That's why I said, let me use this as a platform in 1994 to talk about what we need to be doing in government. It was my first taste of politics that I said, this is something that I may be able to do one day. Let me get more experience, let me learn more, and let me see how to move forward with this conversation.
Yeah, because just like how we were talking about, the safety of different neighborhoods in the 80s, I think it was also very common to think of Manhattan as you better not go to a public school because A, you're not going to learn, and B, you might get killed.
So true.
So
So imagine what they were saying. If they said about Manhattan, imagine what they were saying about Brownsville in East New York, which was the murder capital.
right. Well, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't really know politically everything that was going on, but I feel like Giuliani, or, for maybe it wasn't him, maybe it was just a demographic thing, but I feel like he was pushing the problem out to the boroughs, like the Bronx and Brooklyn, Brownsville, all that. I feel like he was pushing it out of Manhattan. So Manhattan would start to become attractive for businessmen, businesses, real estate developers, and so on. And his assumption was, let's just kick this problem down to the boroughs.
I think it was a combination, and people have different approaches to how they govern. I believe that Mayor Giuliani, the former mayor, he saw that if we can turn Manhattan into this attractive, shiny apple, we could draw people in, and the gravitational pull of the tourists and business and turning it around would give an appearance that the city was stable. Because remember back then in 1991, we were only getting in the city 29 million tourists with $10 billion in economic revenue. I talk about this all the time. And when you fast forward to 2018, we had 65 million tourists with $44 billion in economic revenue. So the city becoming safe was really an economic stimulus package because businesses opened, we became attractive, tourists started to come here, and they started to say they want to be a part of this city. And I think his mindset was, we will hide the dysfunctionality in our other boroughs, 4 other boroughs. Let's just make Manhattan the shining example of what we can do. And then we'll get to the other boroughs. Because this has always been a city where the outer boroughs, the term that they use, was where people live, but the money was made in Manhattan, Wall Street, other corporations, tourism. People didn't really get on the train and buses and come to the outer boroughs. They stayed for the most part. The Empire State Building, the Statue of Liberty, Times Square. That was the real heart and soul of the city. And I think that's what he thought. But unfortunately for us, when we started to drive down crime in Manhattan, we all started to drive down crime across the city, and we saw the reflection of that throughout the entire city and the other 4 boroughs as well.
Would you say, I always try to feel, with presidents, sometimes they have a foreign policy, and it's like the Truman Doctrine. He had a particular philosophy about, whether, communism was a slippery slope. There's the Monroe Doctrine, whatever that was. All rulers or executives have their own kind of philosophy of governing. And that was, you just described maybe what was a Giuliani doctrine, where
Yes.
if it was broken in Manhattan, then either punish it thoroughly or drive it out, kick it out.
Right.
And not judging whether that is good or bad, like you mentioned, there was many good aspects of that. And Bloomberg, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm very naive on this. Bloomberg, if he had a doctrine, a Bloomberg doctrine, it's almost like if something's not working, let's either eliminate it or merge it with something that's working, or throw money, sell it, or throw money at it to make it work. Like there was some sort of, very kind of, I don't know, autocratic way of fixing things, a business-like way of fixing things.
Exactly. And remember, Bloomberg came from the stock universe, and he had a different thought. Many people in government were always in government. And so they existed in this echo chamber, and they really don't know the universe outside of government. And that is why Bloomberg was a great mayor. We really underestimate what he did. Bloomberg inherited a city after 9/11 with $4.6 billion in deficit. He went through one of the worst economic crises this city ever experienced. And yet, when he left, he turned over a $2.6 billion surplus. He left this city economically healthy. He built an entire college on Roosevelt Island that became a feeder system so that we could not only just depend on Wall Street, but that we can deal with the tech industry in this city. We've become the Silicon Valley of the East because of some of the things he did. We had a 3-year increase in lifespan under Bloomberg. He started removing the smoking in restaurants, where smoking employees in restaurants were dealing with lung cancers and other diseases because of cigarettes. He looked at the school system, the 311 system. The problem we do in government is that we come in and we believe we have to discard who was there before us instead of doing like Apple and Steve Jobs. We need a 1.0, a 2.0, a 3.0 to continue those good things that were in place before. Bill de Blasio brought some great ideas, but we didn't do enough to build on the ideas that Michael Bloomberg did, and that's what we need to start doing.
Like, what would you say is de Blasio's de Blasio doctrine? What's his philosophy of government, would you say?
He really believed in the concept of a tale of two cities. He believed that there was a level of haves and have-nots. He believed, as he indicated, that there's a lot of money in the country, but it's in the wrong hands. He believed in that the poorer parts of the city, they're basically against the affluent parts. And I just feel that is wrong. And the numbers the numbers don't bear out that concept. And really, people don't know how to dig into the crevices of what is happening in our city. If you look at a Wall Street and its impact on this city, we can't survive without a Wall Street. Not only Wall Street is not a major contributor to our city and the economy, but also if you look at something as simple as the nonprofits, and I talked with my staff about this. We have 35,000 nonprofits in the city, $33.6 billion in payroll tax, 600,000 employees. That's a major economic engine in our city. Where do you think we get that money from? Joe the Messenger is not invested in nonprofits.
I always wonder this when this type of argument comes up. Like, why don't people realize that? Like, money doesn't come out of thin air. Like, somebody has earned it enough to bring it into an area.
Right.
Like you look at old towns that lost their manufacturing, 100 years ago, like Scranton, Pennsylvania, or, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, all these former steel places. Money left because they no longer were providing a service or a product that outside cities needed. You need money from outside to come in. So Wall Street and now media and other industries have done that for New York City. Where do people think the money comes for the surplus that Bloomberg created, or the 35,000 charities and nonprofits? Like, it has to come from or look at all the hospitals. It's partially funded by immense amounts of philanthropy.
Yes, no, so true. And when you start looking at the boards, when you start looking at who are the donors, when you start doing a profile, the same people that are being demonized are in fact some of the greatest contributors to fill the gap what government is leaving off. There's so many programs that affluent New Yorkers have made the determination that I've done well. Now let me give back to make my city operate better. We're just in a climate now where it's red meat to throw and point the finger and really demonize success in this country and in this city when it's an untrue narrative. The real narrative is that countless number of New Yorkers who have done well. Look at the Gates and the Bloombergs who are committed to give away half their fortune. Here are people who said that this country has been great for me. I want to give back. What they don't want to do, they don't want to, as smart businessmen, they don't want to throw their money away to the irresponsibility of government. I say this city and this country has become like my son used to be. He'll spend his money, then he'll put his hands in my pockets. That's what frustrates people. They want to know, how do we have $27 billion and we can't educate our children? How do we have a $92 billion budget and we can't deal with homeless? We can't deal with the NYCHA issue. That's what frustrates people, is that it's not only about dollars and cents, it's about common sense. We don't have common sense government where we can move a city like this forward. And that is what you find many of our affluent New Yorkers are frustrated with, that we don't have the right common sense in this city and in this country.
So some of these issues you brought up, and there are a couple of. There's always issues where a city can improve, and you've identified them so much in many of your speeches. But some common issues in New York City are homelessness, housing, issues with the mentally ill, issues with education, issues with healthcare. But just going to reel back a tiny second. 2000, I think it was 2006. You became a state senator. You finally decided, okay, I'm going to make the move. Was that? I'm just going to flat ask. Was that boring for you? After you were a policeman, you were like, fighting criminals like a superhero on the subway. You were making changes that were actually happening in the police force, and now you got to go up to Albany, and it seems like that just seems like a mess. The New York State legislature, just the little I know, it just seems like a mess.
No. You know what? There's a lot of rumors about how dysfunctional Albany is, and there's a lot of rumors about the big mistakes. Let me just say, it's not a rumor. It is. The place is a mess. Getting better, evolving to a better place, but there's just a lot of issues in the system. Too many people are elected and just want to be elected. And they get frustrated. They fall into that tar pit, and they just become what Albany has been for so many years. And the Albanys of America, the state houses across America, you have the same problems. And so it was a different mindset, but it was a good moment for me, because up until that time, I was every day dealing with crises. That when I left the transit police, the NYPD merged, I became a lieutenant and a captain, that all the pressures were gone. And I realized that, listen, you're dealing with some pains that you have to find, and you need to go and do some internal healing. So if it wasn't for that pause, I would not have started the journey of meditate and do other things to really start taking care of myself and deal with the stress that came from those 22 years of not only fighting the bad guys in blue jeans, but fighting the bad guys in blue police uniforms. It was a nonstop battle for those 22 years.
And do you feel overall, I mean, obviously you had a lot of victories during that time in terms of, the police force in New York City is a lot different now than it was in the 1980s. So, but then you go to the state, first off, when you ran for, to be a state representative or a state senate, were you state senate?
Senate, mm-hmm.
Yeah. What was, this was kind of your second campaign, but your first big campaign that you won and you were successful. What was that like? Like, how do you win your first campaign?
Well, at that time, I was extremely well known from many years of advocacy, of standing up for New Yorkers. I think of some of the stories. I had a young Polish gentleman who was killed in Williamsburg at the time, and I went there with his family. He was killed only because he was Polish, and I went there with his family. And standing with the family, a young Chinese food delivery boy was robbed and assaulted bad. I joined the family and called for the persons to be held accountable. A lot of things around racism and anti-Semitism. I had a woman in Garrison Beach at the time. She saved up her money. She moved into a beautiful home in Garrison Beach. When she went to go pick up a second load of furniture, a group of residents there wanted no blacks on her block. They went into the house and destroyed the house, painted swastikas on the wall, and just destroyed all of her stuff. And I went out there with my team of African-American officers, and we said, we're sleeping in this house tonight, and we dare anyone to come and say you're going to damage this woman's house. Because remember, that brought me back to the days of my mother. And so people knew me as a person that was always there to stand up for people who were treated unfairly. That became the symbol of how people knew me. So when I ran for state senate, everyone that was in the race decided we're not going to run against this guy, and they got out of the race. And so I was able to have one opponent where we got, I believe, 87% of the vote, and I was elected to become the senator.
So you don't like majorities really. Like you need 85% or more to feel like okay, I did it. I got elected.
And it was knocking on doors. I'll never forget one door I knocked on. We're talking 15 years of nonstop advocacy. And I knocked on this one door, introducing myself to voters. I'm running for state senate. Here's my platform. And this older woman came to the door, and she says, I said, hi, my name is Eric Ash. She said, I know who you are. She went inside the house. She said, hold on, dear. She went inside the house. She came back out. She had a jar full of coins. She said, I watched you for years. I don't have a lot of money, but I knew one day you were going to be running for office, and I wanted to be able to contribute to your campaign. And every time I went grocery shopping, I put the coins in this jar, and I want to give this to you.
Wow, that's an incredible story. You should call her up now. Hey, I'm running for mayor. So I'll skip the legislature stuff. That's whatever. But
some good bills though. We passed. It's really the story of my journey. I always tell people I am the original disruptor. Getting arrested as a child and going into police and fighting for reforms. Marching with Randy Credico for the Rockefeller drug laws. I used to be a sergeant, do midnight tours, and when I got off duty, I would go to Rockefeller Plaza and march with advocates saying that we need to take away these draconian drug laws. I went to Albany and I became the co-sponsor of the bill that removed the drug laws. I led the charge to stop pregnant mothers from being handcuffed onto hospital beds, and we were able to pass legislation with Senator Velman at Montgomery. They used to handcuff them to the bed while they were pregnant.
Why?
And they said that it was unsafe to not leave them handcuffed to the bed. And so they used to keep the names of every child that was stopped in the city in a stop and frisk. Even if they did no crime at all, they were holding their names in a database. And I was able to co-sponsor a bill with Hakeem Jeffries and get my colleagues on the Republican and the Democrat side to get that bill done and signed, and we got the law passed. So there was a series of things we did in Albany that really changed the life of people, and I continue to be a disruptor.
Yeah, so this is almost like a training ground where you learn to build consensus from many different constituencies, and that's something really important for a mayor because you're dealing with all these boroughs, you're dealing with all these institutions. I want to ask specifically about the Rockefeller laws because I didn't know that you were involved in that, and those seemed so bad and so, like you say, draconian. What's happening now with like when the bill you sponsored was passed? Were people released who were previously imprisoned from those laws, or what's the status of people who are in prison, like in jail for life on 3 strikes and you're out?
Right. It's a combination. I'm not sure how the judicial branch handled the release. But there were a large number of people who were released because their time was served, and it was a period of time when many people were finally seeing how just ridiculous some of these laws were. And what's interesting, Mela Rockefeller, who's a part of the Rockefeller lineage, is a very good friend of mine, and she was opposed to the laws as well. And during my time on the Eastern District drug treatment, we talked about that together. We both served on the board together. And so the goal was to get those people with those very difficult jail sentences. A lot of people don't even realize how bad the Rockefeller drugs laws were. And we were able to get it reversed, and many people were able to see their prison time either reduced or released from jail.
Well, that's really good to hear. So before we get into your time as Brooklyn Borough President, I want to ask you, so at one point, you were diagnosed with type 2 diabetes while you're in the middle of all of this. You were Brooklyn Borough President then,
yes,
right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that must have been a kind of different sort of wake-up call. Like here you've been on this one path since you were 15, and now suddenly it brings you very much to, who you are as a physical person as opposed to like what your role is in changing society. Like what happened? What was going on?
That's so true. I remember I was out of the country and I had a pain in my stomach. I thought it was colon cancer because it didn't move. It stood in one place on the left-hand side. And I just lost a good friend to colon cancer. And the symptoms just seemed, so similar to what I heard he was going to.
Was it an extreme pain?
It was a noticeable discomfort that was present. And you know your body. You know when you have a new discomfort that just didn't subside. And men, you have to drag men to the hospital. And so when I
haven't had a checkup since I was 15. What are you saying?
And so when I came back to the city, at the same time, I noticed that I was getting vision loss, and actually I couldn't see the alarm clock. My left eye, my vision just totally left me. And I went to the doctor that day, and he did a colonoscopy and endoscopy, and he checked my stomach and my colon. When I came out of sedation, he says, Eric, you have an ulcer, a small ulcer, but he said your real problem is your diabetes. It's out of control. Your A1C is in the high teens. And what was fascinating, James, when he told me that, a part of me said, well, you knew it was coming, Eric. Your mother's diabetic. Your family members are either diabetic or pre-diabetic. This is the route of what you live. This is your heritage. It's in your DNA. But it wasn't until he said, listen, you may go blind in about a year and you're going to lose. I had permanent nerve damage also. I had tingling in my hands and feet. And he says that, you have permanent nerve damage. You could lose some fingers and some toes. And, you have going to have some kidney issues. And so it was, once he said that, I said, whoa, I didn't sign up for this. Because in the African-American community, we sweeten diabetes. We say she has a little sugar. And to us, it's all part of the journey of life. When you get to a certain age, you get heart disease, you get diabetes, you get arthritis. That is what we believe, And so I decided that, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this stuff. I did something I like to say extremely scientific. I went to Google and Googled reversing diabetes. And all this information came up. And what was key, I didn't put in the term that's often used, living with diabetes. I put in reversing diabetes. And I was able to come in contact with some great doctors, Dr. Esselton down in Ohio from the Cleveland Clinic, Dr. Greger, who wrote the book How Not to Die, an amazing book, Dr. Barnard. And I reached out to them, Dr. Essie, and said, listen, I told them who I was, and I want to see, is this true, what I'm reading in your book? And what was fascinating is that I went to 5 of the best doctors in the city who understood, endocrinologists, who told me, it's in your DNA, you eat too much carbs, there's nothing you could do about it, it's not reversible. And I just refused to accept that. So I flew down to see Dr. Essie, and he told me what to do. And he says that it's in your diet. And I remember I was like, listen, guy, I'm going blind. What are you talking about? What does that have to do with fried chicken? He was like, he looked at me. I can remember like yesterday. I'm trying to talk with him, and he like gave me this look like, this is stupid. Either you're going to follow it or you're not. So
can I ask a question? Because you're going through this journey. What if you had asked the doctor, okay, my problem is my ability to metabolize sugar. Mm-hmm. What happens if I simply eat less sugar? What will happen? Then there's less work on the body and less inflammation, less stress on the body, less energy required from the body. What would doctors say?
And that's so good. So you hear different diets. You hear the low carb diet. You hear the no sugar diet, the paleo diet. You hear different diets. And what they do, they may deal with a specific issue that your body may be experiencing at the time, but you are still eating foods that will impact the rest of your body. So what is the good of saying, okay, I lowered my insulin, but you know what? I'm having heart problems, or I'm having prostate problems, or I have breast cancer. And so the biggest myth was, as I learned, is that diabetes has nothing to do with this whole concept about sugar. Yes, you shouldn't be eating a lot of sugar because it has so many harmful effects. Diabetes connected to saturated fat. It clogs your arteries, don't allow insulin to do the job that it's supposed to do. So if you're eating a diet on high in saturated fat, then you are actually feeding your diabetes without even knowing it. And it's not because your mother had diabetes. It's not that you share the same DNA. You share the same dinner. You both eat the same thing. So that is why you're all having the same problem. So I came back to the city. 3 weeks later, after changing my diet, going to a whole food, plant-based diet, my vision clears up.
Wow.
3
So
months.
you knew you were in the right direction right away.
Right. Nothing is better than quick results. You know that?
You went on a plant-based diet. So I'm sure everyone asks you the obvious question, where do you get your protein? I'm not going to ask that. I actually asked the people who work with you earlier, and they told me the answer. But where do you get good food?
It's all over the place. It's amazing. If there was ever a time to be a whole food plant-based eater, this is the time. The number of restaurants, recipes, food, it is just remarkable. When I started out this journey, my first month, my food tastes like garbage, but I was just so determined.
Right.
After I saw the results, I said, Eric, weather through it. Then I went to next month, I said, you know what? Let's start Googling recipes, try different things, learn the power of spices, learning how to eat different meals. And then all of a sudden, I said, wow, this tastes good. Then I started looking at different restaurants in the city because I'm an oil-free eater. I don't use any oil at all also. And I started looking at different ways to cook, different ways to make my bread and sweet potatoes and mixing food and moving away from the tradition of how people talk about food is supposed to be eaten. Why? Who made the rule that oatmeal must be consumed only in the morning? You can eat oatmeal whenever you want. So I was able to break free of all the rules of eating and start to embrace food in a different way. I make a great ice cream made out of frozen fruits. There's so many different foods.
You should write about this. I mean, you are writing about this,
yes,
right?
I'm doing a book that's specifically targeting the African American community on how soul food is connected to slave food and how we can eat healthier and live a healthier lifestyle. The connectivity of dementia and Alzheimer's is some of the great research that is shown. We used to think our brain was not connected to our body, and our poor health and nutrition is separate from, the dementia that settles in our brain. When this is all connected, the fuel of the brain is the fuel you put in the body, and that fuel is the food. So you need to ask yourself, how are you fueling yourself? And it's not a comfortable conversation because food is more than just what's on the end of your fork. It's how we identify ourselves. When I used to lose a basketball game or baseball game, my dad used to, treat me to a nice treat, maybe a hot dog or a steak or something. And we start to identify those feelings we have with the food that we have. So we have to redefine what we feel about food. And that's what we're doing in Brooklyn. We're doing some amazing stuff in Brooklyn. Started out with Meatless Mondays in our school. Think about it. Processed meat is a type 1 carcinogen equal to cigarette smoking, according to the WHO. Yet we serve it to our babies in school. I mean, this is unbelievable that we're doing this. So we finally got the city of New York to stop purchasing processed meat, no longer serving it to our children in school.
So this is what I want to ask you about. So now you're Brooklyn Borough President. You're in charge of, like we said earlier, the third largest city, but there's strings attached. You still have to go to New York City Central to get permission for some things, not for other things. You have budgets for some things, and other things you have to draw upon New York City's budget. How a lot of your day is spent, you stand with certain people, you listen to various constituents' issues, but some part you're making executive decisions that then get implemented, and Brooklyn and perhaps the city changes as a result. So, like, this is one of them, for instance. What do you? And again, I'm naive. What do? You just say, no more meets on Monday, and then it happens, or like what happens?
So you use the office of the borough president. The borough president, the office doesn't make the man or woman. The man or the woman makes the office. And when you look at the borough president used to be one of the most powerful office in the city of New York. It used to be with the Board of Estimate. The borough presidents decided the borough of the city, negotiated the borough of the city. It was a very powerful position. Someone went to court, one man, one vote, because Staten Island is so much smaller than Brooklyn. The court ruled that you had to disband that system. It took away a lot of powers of the borough president. So on first view, you feel that the borough president is just a symbolic place, but it's not. If you use the office correctly, and we have been successful in doing that by developing relationships with the existing mayor, with the city council, with our state legislators, we have been able to push through and then use the leverage of some of our funding. We get a lot of capital dollars to do internal brick and mortar building, and then we get discretionary money. And so, for example, I took some of my discretionary money. I'm a big believer in healing the mind of a child. So I took some of my discretionary money and I sent my teachers away to learn yoga and mindfulness and meditation so that they would start the school day with their children to show their children how to meditate. My goal is that every child in the city of New York should start their day with 20 minutes of meditation. A lot of these children are broken by the time they get in school. We're telling them, learn how to multiply and divide, and they're saying, who's going to help me from being divided? And so we use our discretionary money to put that program in place, and now it's growing. We used our discretionary money, $126 million in our capital money to put in schools to teach our children technology so they can be ready for some of the jobs of the future. So you're able to use your money in a smart way and your bully pulpit to push through initiatives that you think are important. It was our aggressive behavior that got the city council and the mayor to now move away from processed meat. And look at what we're doing in Bellevue Hospital. I was just in Orlando, Florida, speaking to almost over 1,000 healthcare professionals talking about the programs that we're doing at Bellevue Hospital. We have a lifestyle medicine clinic in Bellevue Hospital where people are coming in and they're learning how to do lifestyle changes to follow my path and getting off medicine or reversing diseases. We have 173 people who are signed up in the program, over 600 people on the waiting list, and we're going to come out with the preliminary report in January, and it's going to shock the medical community in this entire country. But not only was I able to reverse my diabetes, my 80-year-old mother followed me 2 months after going to a whole food plant-based diet. Mom got off of her insulin. And I am so proud because mommy has 6 children. She loves them all, but she adores me. So it was my pleasure to watch someone that's significant to me. And other families need to know that. James, think about it. No one we know don't know someone that is not going through a chronic disease. All of us. If we take a moment, either we're going through it personally, or we're thinking about hospice for a family member. We're trying to figure out how we're going to have that next test, that next examination. Chronic diseases hijacks your life, and it hijacks the life of your family member. A person who has Alzheimer's and they're a caregiver, they are several times more likely to have Alzheimer's also. The caregiver, people look at the person who's going through the experience, but the caregiver is traumatized. And it's unfortunate that none of the presidential candidates that are running for president right now are engaged in a conversation of how do we prevent diseases? How do we make Americans healthy, not just to have access to health care, but how do we stop having the need for them to repeatedly go into hospital? We spend 80 cents on a dollar nationally for chronic diseases. 50% of Americans are experiencing chronic diseases. This is not sustainable. And what we're doing in Bellevue is going to show that there's another way to do it. We don't have to be held hostage by pharmaceutical companies that are destroying our families every day.
Well, it reminds me of what you were just saying about how the man makes the office. You have all these experiences with reversing your diabetes, fighting, various abuses in the law enforcement industry, building consensus on both sides of the aisle when you're in Albany. These are all critical skills, obviously, for getting some of these unique programs in place. Let's say now you're mayor. What are some of the first 2 or 3 biggest changes you can envision actually happening that would be under your control, that you could say, I want this to happen, so it most likely will happen?
We have to change the paradigm. We have to shift the paradigm, not only in New York City, but across the entire globe. Here's what we do. We create crises, then we govern the crises we created. That's what we do in New York, and that's what we do in America. We learn from policing. Police agencies in the city was dysfunctional. We took a dysfunctional agency and we made it function. And because of that, we're safer and we're a more productive city. That same mindset of real-time governing, you cannot go into the 21st century and continue to govern annually. We must move to a real-time governing mechanism. The reason cities are dysfunctional is because of the agencies. If your agency is dysfunctional, it doesn't matter how much money you put in the city. If the DOE, Department of Education, if they're not functioning to educate our children and they're feeding the healthcare crisis, then no matter how much money you put in, it's going to be dysfunctional. Same with homeless services. There's a reason we continue to see people who are homeless on the street and the increase, lying on our trains, lying on the street, mental health issues, attacking people with pipes and killing 4 people. There's a reason we're seeing all of this, because the agencies are not fulfilling their obligation and responsibility. I know how to turn around agencies. This city is a 4-cylinder vehicle operating on 3 cylinders, and we have become accustomed to operating on 3 cylinders. We have to get it running on 4 cylinders again. We do that by bridging technology, artificial intelligence, bringing in our great tech industries, the Google, the Microsoft, the Dells, bring them into how do you run a city correctly, and then we start governing in real time.
Yeah, so it's almost like you have one program in place in Brooklyn where I'll probably mess up my description of this, but you're measuring essentially the temperature in the waiting rooms in, the official offices where people are waiting for help or decisions or they're online for something. And you could see, like you say, in real time where there's congestion in terms of, helping the people, helping the constituents, which offices probably need more employees, which processes are probably broken down. So that's why everyone's waiting around. And that kind of approach seems to work.
One of the programs we're doing is the Heat Seek program. It's a small device, no larger than this, fits into an apartment or building or apartment building, and it gauges the heat in the apartment. Every year, unscrupulous landlords play this heating game where they turn down the heat, then the inspectors come out, they turn it up, then once the inspector leaves, they turn it down. This device can be monitored remotely, and it shows you the heating pattern. So if a tenant has to go to court and show that there's a history of not providing the right amount of heat, because the quality of life is important, you're able to show the documentation of that. We were able to get the housing judges. They came in, they saw it, they liked it. That should be in every apartment where you have a history of heating complaints. We're slow to move that, to roll that out.
Right, and this, I would say this doctrine of, data-oriented solutions combined with the real-time needs of the constituents, this is a direction that, at least in New York City, we haven't seen before. And now everybody's telling me I've got to be respectful of your time, so I want to be. But when's your book coming out? Because this is only part 1. We're going to have a part 2. Do you promise we'll have a part 2?
Yes.
When's your book coming out?
We're in the process of writing it now. I believe it's going to be out sometime in the middle of next year. So we're in the process of doing it now.
So it gives us a long time before the election.
Right. We're excited about it.
Because I'm only beginning now my mayoral questions. I want to get out of this how to run a city. So We'll count this as part 1. We learned all about you. We're going to do part 2, which is about healthcare, your journey through it, and more on the politics of what's going on in the mayor's race and in Brooklyn and so on. And I'm looking forward to part 2 of this discussion. And as we talked about before the podcast, I'm looking forward to writing a speech for you, my first political speech that I'll write. So thanks very much, Eric.
Thank you. Really enjoy you.
Yeah, same. Hang on. Don't go yet. I want to remind you, I want you to have a copy of what I think is one of my best books that I've ever written, Reinvent Yourself. This book was so important to me because I've had to reinvent my career from scratch so many times that I learned all the techniques that really helped me to reinvent myself, to master a new area of life, to thrive. All you have to do is go to www.reinventbook.net. That's www.reinventbook.net. I'm excited about what this book can do for you, and you should be as well. The next step, claim your copy before they're gone. Just go to www.reinventbook.net to learn more. That's www.reinventbook.net.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.